When he leaned in and said, "Did you change your hair?" I smiled, but not because it was funny. I smiled because my heart had just whispered something I hadn't dared say out loud for years. One harmless question, one accidental glance, and yet it became the start of something I couldn't ignore, not in my body, not in my marriage, not in the mirror. If you've ever done everything right and still felt something missing, hit like and subscribe now, because this story isn't just about a woman. It might just be about you. When I pulled up to Valerie's house that Sunday afternoon, the sky had that soft, dull shade of gray that feels more like a sigh than a color. Not stormy, not bright, just muted, like a curtain pulled halfway across the day. I'd been down that street more times than I could count, but that day felt different. Not for any real reason, or maybe for all the ones I hadn't admitted yet. In the passenger seat, I had my usual offerings, a homemade cranberry tart, and a book I thought Valerie might like. It was something about reinventing life after 50 fitting, I thought, though I hadn't actually read it. Before I stepped out, I adjusted my scarf, smoothed my blouse, and checked the mirror. Not out of vanity. It was more like muscle memory, a quiet need to make sure my face wasn't revealing something I hadn't said out loud yet. She opened the door before I could knock. Valerie, always warm, always a little too cheerful, pulled me into a hug and started talking before I'd even stepped over the threshold. The house smelled like cinnamon and orange peel, and somewhere in the background, jazz was playing soft and steady. Everything was exactly as I remembered. Familiar, safe, predictable. And then I heard him. "Mom, do you know where the sentence stopped?" I turned toward the hallway, and there he was. The last time I saw Eli, he was barely out of high school. Tall but thin, awkward eyes always locked on a screen or rolled toward the ceiling. Now, he was something else entirely. He'd filled out taller, broader, more grounded somehow. His hair was a little longer tousled, like he hadn't bothered to fix it. His t-shirt clung to his frame in a way that made me suddenly aware of how warm the house felt. His eyes met mine, and he smiled, not sheepishly, not like a boy greeting his mom's friend. Just steady, like he remembered me, like he saw something in me. "Claire," he said, half a question, half recognition. I blinked. "Eli." "Wow." He walked over and offered his hand, not the way kids do out of politeness, but like a man who'd learned how to hold someone's attention without needing to say much. When our hands touched, I felt it, the warmth of his palm, the strength in it. It lasted barely a second longer than necessary, but enough to shift something in me. Just slightly. Just enough to make me aware of my body in a way I hadn't been in a long time. "Been a while," he said. 8 years, give or take. Valerie, still talking, waved us into the kitchen like nothing unusual had just happened. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe I was imagining it. Or maybe I wasn't. He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice had a low, dry rhythm that made even small words feel like something more. I tried to focus on Valerie, her garden, her travel plans, the usual whirlwind of her life, but my attention kept slipping. I noticed how Eli's forearms flexed when he reached for a cup, how he watched me when I spoke. Not in an obvious way, not staring, just observing. Quiet, intentional. I adjusted the neckline of my blouse, unsure why I suddenly felt like it was sitting too high or too low, or just not right. When he handed me a saucer, our fingers brushed again. Lightly, deliberately, I think, Or maybe I wanted it to be. My heart did that fluttery thing it used to do when I was 25 and someone interesting walked into a room. I hadn't felt it in years. Not with David, not with anyone. At one point, I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my wrists and stared at my reflection. I didn't recognize the expression in my own eyes, that flicker of something I didn't know I'd missed until it came back. When I returned, they were finishing dessert. Eli stood and moved to clear my plate before I could. His fingers touched mine, just briefly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even inappropriate. But it was enough to remind me I wasn't invisible. Not to everyone. I sat back down, smiled at Valerie, nodded along with her stories. But inside, something had shifted. The air between us had changed. Something unspoken now hummed in the quiet. And for the rest of the evening, I wasn't listening to words anymore. I was listening to everything that wasn't being said. I told myself I was overthinking it. What happened at Valerie's house, the handshake, the glances, the almost something could easily be explained away. A grown son being polite, a tired woman reading too much into an ordinary evening. But that night, as I undressed for bed, I paused in front of the mirror. Not to study flaws or check for wrinkles like I usually did, but to look at myself, really look. And for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel invisible, not beautiful, not youthful, but seen. That's what it was. He had seen me. The days that followed passed like they always did. I folded laundry, answered emails, made dinner, moved from task to task with the quiet precision that comes from doing things for decades. And yet he was there. Not physically, of course, but in the way I paused longer than necessary while brushing my hair. In the music I suddenly turned on while cooking. In the way I chose earrings again for no real reason. Then came the excuse. I had a baking dish to return the one I'd brought the cranberry tart in. I told myself I'd just drop it off, leave it at the door if no one was home. A quick errand, nothing more. But I didn't knock. I used the back door like I always had. Valerie and I had been friends long enough that formality had long since faded. The kitchen was quiet. No music. No footsteps. I was about to place the dish on the counter when I heard his voice. "Hey," he said, half awake. I turned. He was standing at the edge of the kitchen, barefoot, coffee mug, in hand hair still messy from sleep. "Didn't hear you come in." "I was just dropping this off," I said quickly, lifting the dish slightly, like it explained everything. He walked toward the counter and leaned against it casual, like this wasn't strange at all. Like we were two people who did this all the time. "You want coffee?" I should have said no. Every part of me, the reasonable, responsible married part, knew that. But I nodded. He moved slowly, unhurried his movements, fluid and familiar in the space. I stayed by the sink arms, loosely crossed, pretending not to notice how close he was standing as he poured. He handed me the cup. Our fingers touched again. This time, it lingered. We didn't sit. We just stood there, facing each other in the soft morning light filtering through the window blinds. The coffee was bitter. Strong. I didn't mind. He took a sip, watching me over the rim of his mug. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said. "I wasn't planning to stay." "But you are." I didn't answer. He tilted his head slightly, still studying me. "You always this spontaneous?" I raised an eyebrow. "Are you always this comfortable being half-dressed in front of guests?" He smiled, not cocky, just amused. Depends on the guest. Silence. Not awkward, just full. His eyes moved slowly from my face to my collarbone to the place where my hand rested against the countertop. My skin felt electric under his gaze. I should go, I thought. But I didn't move. He set his mug down, took a step closer. His presence was still, intentional, not forceful but sure. I've thought about you, he said quietly. The words landed harder than I expected. There was no arrogance in his tone, just truth. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to. He raised one hand not to touch, just to hover his fingers tracing the space between us. Then he touched my jaw. Lightly. Barely there. My skin burned where his fingers passed. And then it happened. He leaned in, slowly, so slowly that I could have stopped it, could have pulled away, laughed it off, pretended it hadn't crossed my mind the second I walked in that door. But I didn't. I tilted my head. My eyes fluttered shut, and his mouth found mine. The kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was heat sudden and real and consuming. The kind of kiss you don't plan. The kind that answers questions you didn't even realize you'd been asking. My hand found his chest. The other gripped the edge of the counter behind me. I tasted coffee and something else. Something younger than I remembered feeling. Time disappeared. The moment stretched seconds, maybe more, until I pulled away first. My breath caught in my throat. My heart loud in my ears. I can't, I whispered. But I didn't move. He looked at me. Eyes darker now. You already did. Outside, I heard a car pass. The spell broke. I stepped back too quickly, nearly knocking over the dish I'd brought. I set it down hard on the counter. I have to go, I said, my voice shaking. He didn't argue, just nodded. Slow, steady, see you around. I left without looking back. I thought I could forget it. That kiss. The pull. The way my breath caught as I closed the door behind me and walked away like a woman who hadn't just undone the knot of her entire life in one stolen moment. But I couldn't. It followed me in the quiet moments while I waited for the kettle to boil, while I folded towels, while David told me about a meeting that went too long. Eli's mouth, his voice, the way his fingers brushed my skin. It stayed. I told myself it was a mistake, a fluke, a spark that would die out if I didn't fan it, but it didn't. The next time I saw him, it wasn't planned. I had signed up weeks ago to attend a reading at the local bookstore, one of those quiet Thursday evening events with folding chairs and lukewarm coffee. I went alone, happy for an excuse to leave the house without needing to explain why. Valerie had mentioned it once in passing, saying Eli might stop by something about a short film he had submitted that was being discussed. Still, I didn't expect to see him walk in halfway through the talk, his jacket damp from the rain, his hair pushed back, a small notebook in his hand. He didn't see me at first. I didn't wave. But 20 minutes later, when we passed each other near the poetry shelf, he slipped a folded note into my hand without a word. I held it for 5 minutes before opening it. If I asked to see you again, just to talk, would you say yes? I didn't think. I just turned the paper over and wrote yes once. That once became twice, then 3 times. Then weekends that were supposed to be quick coffee, but turned into long walks, shared sandwiches, the warmth of his hand on my back as we crossed the street. We didn't talk about what we were doing. We just did it. I never made excuses. I just said I had errands, or that I needed time to myself. David never asked, or maybe he knew better than to push. One Friday, Eli asked if I wanted to get out of town. There's this place, he said, a cabin near the lake. Not far. One night. No expectations. I hesitated, but I packed a small overnight bag anyway. The cabin was simple wood floors, tall windows, the smell of pine and old books. He made tea. I sat on the couch. We didn't kiss right away. We talked, really talked, for the first time in weeks. He asked what I dreamed of when I was young. I asked him what scared him the most. He said settling. I said disappearing. When he finally leaned in, it was gentle, not like the kiss in the kitchen. This time, it was slower, more certain, less like fire, more like something long buried, finally being allowed to breathe. That night, we lay in bed, tangled limbs, quiet breaths, no guilt, only that quiet hum in my bones that told me I'm still here. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't even about Eli. It was about being chosen, desired, seen, about knowing that somewhere in the middle of all the routines and responsibilities, I still existed as a woman. Not a wife, not a mother, not a calendar full of appointments, just me. He saw me, and for the first time in years, I saw myself. David noticed. Of course he did. He didn't ask. Not directly. But I could feel the shift in the way his eyes lingered on me at dinner, in the pauses between questions he never quite finished. One night, while we were brushing our teeth side by side, like we had for decades, he looked at me through the mirror and said, "You seem different lately." I rinsed my mouth, smiled. In a good way. He nodded too quickly. Sure. He didn't push. That was David's way. We avoided things kindly in our house. No yelling, no accusations. Just silence wrapped in politeness. But silence has weight. And he was starting to feel it. So was Valerie. She called me on a Tuesday, asking if I'd come by for coffee. Nothing big, she said. Just a slow morning and a fresh batch of muffins. I went. I owed her that much. We sat at her kitchen table, sipping from mismatched mugs, talking about her upcoming trip to Oregon. She mentioned Eli only once, something about his freelance work picking up again. She didn't look at me when she said it. I kept my voice steady, asked the right questions, laughed in the right places. But I could feel it the way her sentences tiptoed around something unsaid. The way she looked at me, just a little too long, when I reached for my cup. "You seem like you've been thinking a lot lately," she said casually. But her tone had changed. Softer. Slower. I smiled too fast. "Don't we all?" She didn't press. Valerie never had to. Women like us, we notice the shifts, even when we don't name them. And then Eli told me he was leaving. We were in his apartment. Dim light, rain tapping at the windows. I had just put on one of his hoodies, something he always pretended not to notice I borrowed. "I got an offer," he said. "Denver. It's a decent project. Pays well. Starts next month." I stared at the wall behind him. "That's fast." He shrugged. "It's what I've been working toward. You're going." "Yeah." "I think I have to." We didn't say much after that. I didn't ask him to stay. He didn't ask me to come. The goodbye wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Before I left, he handed me a book, dog-eared, soft-spined, underlined. Something he said reminded him of me. Inside the front cover was a single line highlighted in blue ink. "Sometimes the most honest thing we can do is lie to stay whole." I read that line 3 times before closing the book. I drove home in silence, the windshield wipers clicking like a metronome. The lights from the highway, smearing into the edges of my vision. David was already in bed when I got back. He looked up from his tablet as I walked in, smiled like he always did. "Good time with Valerie." I nodded, setting my bag down. "Yeah, it was nice." And just like that, life resumed. Except it didn't. Not really. Because now every word felt a little too deliberate. Every touch too choreographed. Every smile something I had to remember to perform. I tried to bring myself back to fall into step again, with the rhythm we'd created over years of shared groceries and quiet dinners and polite intimacy. But I couldn't. The part of me that had been cracked open, the part Eli had touched without needing permission, refused to close. I began to move slower around the house, stare longer out the kitchen window, listen harder to the silences between sentences. David noticed, again. But this time, he didn't speak. He just took my hand one night gently and said, "I know something's been off. I don't want to lose you." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man I'd built a life with. A good man, a kind man. But I didn't know how to answer, so I said nothing. That silence was the only truth I had left. I never saw him again. Not really. Not in the flesh. But Eli stayed in the corners of my days, like the aftertaste of something sweet and fleeting. A memory I didn't try to erase. A name I didn't speak out loud, but carried quietly under my skin. He never called. I never wrote. It wasn't some grand decision. Just a silent understanding. Some people arrive not to stay, but to stir the dust, to make you notice the places you've stopped breathing. Weeks passed, then months. And slowly, life reshaped itself. David and I didn't talk about what happened. I don't think he wanted to know, or maybe he already did. In that way people do, when the truth would cost more than the silence. We tried, though. We cooked together again, traveled once or twice, made love with more presence, even if our minds still wandered elsewhere. There were moments, soft, almost redemptive, where I thought maybe we'd rebuild something new. Not what we had before, but something honest. But the truth is, Eli had given me something David couldn't. Not love, not youth, but recognition. The kind that doesn't ask for permission or explanation. The kind that looks at you and simply says, "I see you." And that changed me. I started choosing things again, not for utility, but for how they made me feel. I wore perfume on quiet days, bought a red dress I didn't need. I started writing again, not for anyone, just to remember what my own voice sounded like on paper. I no longer lived only for structure or for keeping the peace. I began living to feel awake. There was no dramatic farewell, no confrontation, just a quiet shift inward, a return to self. And maybe that's the real story here. Not the affair, not the risk, but the reminder that it's never too late to remember who you are. Even if that remembering comes through a door you weren't supposed to open. Even if it changes everything you thought was settled. There's a line in the book Eli gave me, the one with the underlined passage that I've gone back to many times. It says, "What we bury to keep ourselves safe still grows in the dark, and one day it asks to be named." I think that's what this was, a naming, a claiming, a quiet personal revolution. I still see him sometimes in strangers who pass by in bookstores, in songs that linger too long on the radio. But I don't ache anymore. I don't chase the memory. I let it stay where it belongs, as a chapter, not the whole book. And maybe that's the most honest ending I can offer. If you've ever found yourself asking, "Is this all there is?" You're not alone. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to break free, but to wake up within the life you already have, to see yourself again, to feel your own skin, to write your own name back into the story. If this story touched you even just a little, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes a story isn't just a story, it's a mirror, and you deserve to be seen.